My Lord Mayor, my Lord Lieutenant, Your Excellencies, High Sheriff, faith representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to St. George's Hall and to our Roscoe Lecture today. May I advise you that a hearing loop is in place for those who require it. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please stand? And please receive the President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Mr. John Kufuor, the Pro-Chancellor of Liverpool John Moores University, Commodore Rod Walker, the Vice-Chancellor of the University, Professor Michael Brown, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the University, Mrs. Michelle Ibbs, and the Director of the Foundation of Citizenship at the University, Professor Lord Alton of Liverpool. Please show your appreciation.
Please be seated. Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, honoured guests, I have pleasure in presenting His Excellency John Agyekum Kufuor, President of Ghana, for the award of an Honorary Fellowship of Liverpool John Moores University. This gathering in the magnificent surroundings of St. George's Hall is taking place in a year that is rich in anniversaries. Liverpool is celebrating the 800th anniversary of the granting of her charter by King John. But this is also the bicentenary, which we will celebrate on March the 25th, of the abolition of the slave trade. But for some Merseysiders, whose families originated in West Africa, there is an equally important anniversary to celebrate this year. 2007 is, of course, the 50th year since Ghana became a fully independent nation, and Ghana has a lot to celebrate. They have a vibrant democracy, a free and outspoken press, an entrenched judicial system based on the rule of law, an evolving respect for human rights, a secondary education system which is the envy of many other African nations, and an economy which has been expanding at the rate of around 6% a year, coming close to the top of the African Growth League. The Commonwealth Press Union has described Ghana's media, and I quote, as one of the most unfettered on the continent. Yesterday, I was privileged to hear the President address Chatham House, talking about the situation in countries like Eritrea, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zimbabwe, and regions like Darfur. The President said that he wanted Ghana to be a model for other African nations, enshrining genuine democracy, accountability, and multi-party politics, and above all, safeguarding human rights. He said, and again I quote him directly, "Anyone who hides behind the sovereignty of states to justify genocide or abuses of human rights will meet their day of judgment, and not just in the world to come." Ghana has rightly become a confident nation. The high esteem and confidence which other African leaders have in President Kufuor was recently underlined by their decision in January to choose him to lead the African Union. affectionately known, and you can see why, as the gentle giant at 6 foot 4 inches. President Kufuor towers above supporters and adversaries alike. He responds to the suggestion that his style of government is boring by retorting that if the alternatives, visited on many of Ghana's neighbours, of civil war, military coups, endemic corruption or grinding poverty were interesting, then he would be happy to stick with the boring approach to governance and public life. Born in 1938 of parents who came from distinguished Ghanaian families, John Kufuor attended Prempeh College and was top of his class. He enrolled at Lincoln Inn, London, and was called to the bar in 1961. He was then just aged 22. He subsequently graduated in PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics at Oxford University. And on returning to Ghana, he was rapidly elected as a Member of Parliament and became Deputy Foreign Minister while he was only 30 years of age. His origins are in the central Ghanaian Ashanti town of Kumasi. Now, here in a city that knows a thing or two about football and which has come to admire the skill and talent of African football players, it's worth recording that John Kufuor was once chairman of Kumasi Ashanti Kotoko, one of Ghana's biggest football clubs. Incidentally, the presence of African players in Britain today is not a new phenomenon. The first player of African origin to play in English Football League was Arthur Wharton, who joined Preston North End in 1886, over 120 years ago. President Kufuor, then, is clearly no stranger to Britain or to its pastimes. His presence here this week as the guest of Her Majesty the Queen is part of a full state visit. As he said in Parliament yesterday, this underlines how our shared interests spread into many spheres. Britain and Ghana are partners in the Commonwealth, partners in the United Nations, and they are countries with a shared heritage and a shared history, some of which the President will see firsthand at Liverpool's Maritime Museum later in the day. The past was dealt with in many respects in a unanimous motion passed by the City Council in the millennium year, when we recognised the role that this city had played in the slave trade. And it's been recognised also in the creation of the reconciliation triangle between West Africa, Liverpool and Virginia. But these days, around 200 years later, about 1 million Ghanaians live here in the United Kingdom, and they contribute to this country's culture and identity in many diverse ways. Paul Boateng, for instance, the former cabinet minister and now our ambassador in South Africa, sprang from that community. So did Oswald Boateng, the fashion designer. And we are extremely fortunate that in the Ghanaian High Commissioner, who's with us here today, Anan Kato, we have a distinguished diplomat who leads his community into deeper relationships that are deepened by the day at a social, cultural and political level. But also on the commercial front, we have significant bonds too. In the past decade, more than 2,000 new investments registered in Ghana. More than 200 of them have British equity. Britain is the largest investor in Ghana, with around £500 million of assets. Britain's development assistance of around £60 million last year makes our nation the largest bilateral development partner. Our exports to Ghana are worth around £160 million annually, and their exports to us are worth around £120 million. Exports include gold, diamonds, manganese and cocoa. Confidence in John Kufuor's economic policies led Britain to be the first nation to cancel in 2001 £50 million of historic debts. Confidence amongst the Ghanaian diaspora has also seen the flight of capital in earlier years replaced by the receipt of annually increasing remittances from Ghanaians working or living overseas, last year totalling some $400 million. One of the President's declared ambitions is to see his country become the financial hub of the region. That is clearly not an unrealistic expectation. Ghana is making huge strides, but, of course, it faces great challenges. 45% of the population live on less than $1 a day and 79% on less than $2 a day. But thanks to President Kufuor's emphasis on free, compulsory education and sound financial management, he's been creating the conditions in which these challenges can be successfully met. Thanks to his initiatives, Ghana saw a 16% increase in school enrolments last year. School buses and feeding programs in the schools have led to significant increases in attendance, and plans have been unveiled to provide model secondary schools in each of 138 districts. The 38 teacher training colleges are being upgraded, and an emphasis is being placed on teacher training to teach science, mathematics, and technology. Ghana now has 5 universities, originally built for 25,000 students, but now with 150,000 students on those campuses. And the President has recently given the go-ahead for 10 new privately funded universities to be established, along with student hostels. Liverpool John Moores University knows that there is no more important investment than one we make in education, and we particularly salute your achievements in this crucial area. Ghana was the first place in sub-Saharan Africa where Europeans arrived to trade, first in gold, later in slaves. It was also the first black African nation in the region to achieve independence from a colonial power. His visit to Hull last summer to open the William Wilberforce Institute, and his visit to Liverpool today to receive this fellowship at Liverpool John Moores University symbolise his determination to help us lay to rest the evils of the past and to replace them with new relationships based on partnership and equality. He reminds us that as well as commemorating the bicentenary of the abolition of the trade, we need to be acutely aware of contemporary slavery, estimated to affect some 27 million people in the world today, including many children. The President's self-evident great sense of humanity is inextricably entwined with the story of his country. The modern Republic of Ghana, with its population of 22 million people, was created from the British Gold Coast colony established in 1874 and the territory of Togoland, which had been incorporated in 1956. Calls for self-government grew in the 1950s, and Kwame Nkrumah led his country to independence in 1957. Having turned his country into a one-party state, in 1966 he was overthrown in a military coup, and for the next 26 years there were spasmodic periods of civilian rule. Perhaps the best known of successive military rulers, though, was Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings. In 1991, Rawlings conceded a return to constitutional rule and multi-party politics, and the new 1992 constitution included a 2-term limit to presidential tenure. When Rawlings stepped down in 2000, John Kufuor's opposition party, the President having been in opposition for 30 years, his new patriotic party was elected by popular mandate and then re-elected in December 2004 with more than half the votes cast. John Kufuor, who is in Britain with his wife Teresa, who's sitting alongside our Lord Lieutenant today, they both share something very special in common. Both have backgrounds as midwives. We particularly welcome Mrs. Kufuor here amongst us. Mr. President and Mrs. Kufuor have been blessed with 5 children, and the President believes that the strength of his country's families and the nurturing of its children will provide Ghana with stability and the path to real progress. He puts his expressed religious beliefs into practice by insisting on the dignity of every human being and the centrality of the common good. He cares passionately about the waste of life in countries like the Congo, where 4 million have died in the past decade. He's taken a leading role in mediating regional conflicts, including those in Liberia and the Côte d'Ivoire. All of these qualities were doubtless the reasons why his fellow African leaders, deeply troubled by the loss of 400,000 lives in Darfur, following the loss of 2 million others in southern Sudan, chose him, as I said in January, at the summit of African leaders in Addis Ababa, to be the new chairman of the African Union. He reminds us that the African Union is just 2 years old, and he appeals for patience in helping this fragile but crucial instrument to become a powerful tool for reconciliation and conflict resolution. Like his fellow countryman, Kofi Annan, our distinguished visitor today will be asked to use his many and varied gifts to tackle complex and numerous challenges which will literally determine the life and death of countless men and women in Africa. John Kufuor has a distinguished record of achievement as a lawyer, as a public servant, and as a statesman. The achievements are numerous, and so are the challenges which this gentle giant is preparing to take onto his shoulders. One of the founders of the Institute for Apprentices and Mechanics, which evolved into this university, Liverpool John Moores University, was William Roscoe. Collaborator of William Wilberforce in the abolitionist movement, Roscoe was a Liverpool Member of Parliament, an educationalist, philanthropist, and doyen of the arts. In one of his most famous polemical poems, The Wrongs of Africa, he castigated those who exploited and misused the people and the resources of that great continent. Today, he would be looking on with animated pleasure as this university honours one of Africa's great men. Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, I am honoured to present the President of Ghana for the award of an Honorary Fellowship to Liverpool John Moores University.
By the powers vested in me as Vice-Chancellor of Liverpool John Moores University, I bestow on you an Honorary Fellowship. I congratulate you, and most importantly, I welcome you among us. Thank you.
On behalf of Liverpool John Moores University, but in particular on behalf of the Ghanaians represented here today, and respectful of your traditions and culture, may I invite you, Mr. President, to speak to us with the words Kasa, Kasa, Kasa.
Vice-Chancellor Professor Brown, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I should thank the authorities of the Liverpool John Moores University for conferring this fellowship on me. It is an honor to me, my country, Ghana, and I dare say Africa. Permit me to dedicate it to all those who over the years have worked to promote the inalienable right of man to freedom. The current trends and commitments within the African Union to submit to review for good governance on the basis of democracy, accountable and transparent leadership, tolerance of ethnic and religious diversity, gender balance, rule of law, respect for private initiative and property, capture the expanding horizon for human rights on the African continent. As Providence will have it, the African Union has since January this year deemed it fit to elect me its chairman for this year. The responsibility that comes with this elevation and today's conferment is weighty, but also fulfilling, and I'm very grateful for it. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, I am delighted to be given the opportunity to speak on the platform of the Roscoe Lecture series. I wish, first of all, to commend the university for instituting this yearly event to celebrate the life and works of one of the most illustrious and industrious sons of Liverpool. The university also deserves commendation for making the lecture series an opportunity to promote diversity and a new concept of citizenship that cuts across national, ethnic, cultural, religious, and economic lines. From the perspective of Africa, William Roscoe like his contemporary and colleague William Wilberforce of Hull, is a historic figure for championing the cause of abolition of the slave trade and also protests against discrimination and disrespect for the human person based on race or the color of the skin. This year is the bicentenary of abolition of the slave trade. The anniversary is being celebrated in the Americas, Africa, and here in Europe. I am pleased to remark that Mr. John Prescott, Deputy Prime Minister of this country, was in Ghana last month to commemorate the occasion. While there, he seized the opportunity to visit some of the forts and castles along Ghana's shoreline, from which the triangular route of the slave trade across the Atlantic usually began. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, it is with this celebration for background that I propose to speak to human rights and the citizen. Citizen is an idea, is an incidence of the concept of statehood, which confers rights and responsibilities on an individual titled citizen of a given state. Political and social rights, especially of voting and holding office within the polity, as well as property rights and protection by the states, are among these rights. In return, the citizen is expected to pay taxes, respect the laws of the states, and undertake military duties, as and when necessary. From ancient times, the idea of citizenship was discriminatory, especially against aliens. Even among nationals of the state, there was discrimination in terms of education, gender, culture, the franchise, and property rights. This practice of discrimination has persisted for centuries. Even in an advanced democracy such as you have here in Britain, it was not until as recently as the last century that women could exercise franchise to vote. It is instructive that to this day, all countries distinguish between citizens and non-citizens because of continued acceptance of statehood as the exclusive defining criterion. The idea of citizenship became a vehicle for discrimination, which could range to the extent of regarding non-citizens as second-class people, especially when the state had conquered or subjugated such people. The concept of human rights, too, has a very long history of evolution. From very early times, debate has raged about the universality or otherwise of humanity to entitle mankind to certain basic rights equally. Down through the centuries, on the basis of birth, nationality, culture, race, religion, gender, wealth, social organization, and military might, gradation has been used to discriminate among humankind. From this broad outline can be perceived the concepts and practice of denial of human rights to others outside a defined category, which invariably degenerates into such objectionable practices as slavery, which is the worst form of human abuse. The slave trade can be said to have come to epitomize overtly and on large scale this worst state of violation of human rights. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, last year I was privileged to be the guest of honor at the opening of the Wilberforce Institute of Slavery and Emancipation at Hull. That was where I met Lord Alton. I took the opportunity to make some observations on the transatlantic slave trade, which I wish to share with you today because of their relevance to citizenship and human rights. The topic of slavery is as big and old as it is complex. Perhaps it is as old and as universal as when man began to grope his way out of creation in the primeval state of the jungle law into organized and structured society. From time immemorial, even from the Old Testament fatalistic teachings, slavery and enslavement, more often than not, were accepted as ordained and were therefore not vested with much moral content to cause qualms or compunctions in the perpetrators. This happened in all societies from Europe to Asia, the Americas, and also Africa. But, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, the phenomenon of slavery has such a reach that its implications and the impact it has had on the evolution of human societies in the global context could not have been grasped or appreciated in the early times by the then societies. The nature of this ancient problem, we are told, even led the master philosopher Aristotle to declare in his Politics that, and I quote, humanity is divided into two, the masters and the slaves. It is therefore no wonder that not much is known of any sustained idealistic and principled resistance to this endemic discriminatory social practice till about 2,000 years ago. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, this is why credit must be given to the teachings of the New Testament for challenging the ancient status quo and preaching the indivisibility of equal humanity of all mankind. Subsequently, some thinkers of the age of enlightenment also philosophized on common humanity, even though in practice they did not sustain the universality of the principle among all the races. It was this challenge that in the 18th and 19th centuries inspired such high-minded, gallant individuals like William Roscoe and William Wilberforce, alongside others, to launch the process which ultimately led to the formal abolition of the slave trade in the year 1807. The abolitionists, including William Roscoe, were influenced by the belief that all people are created equal and are imbued with dignity, rights, and responsibilities which should be harnessed and utilized for their self-development and the development of their communities and humanity as a whole. The abolitionist movement was the antecedent of the Anti-Slavery Convention, which is one of the oldest human rights instruments. It can be described as having set the tone for the many international human rights conventions that are taken for granted today. The Anti-Slavery Convention has a lot in common with the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which affirms that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. This article endorses the concept of global citizenship, which is premised on respect for humanity, human dignity, human rights, rule of law, democracy, and global social responsible citizenship. Thank God the Atlantic slave trade has been over for more than 2 centuries now. However, effects of slavery still remain with us. Based on the state of material developments, or lack of it, our universe is now categorized into first, second, and third worlds. We in Ghana and most of the developing world are said to belong to the third world. Significantly, these countries, that is, those in the category of Ghana, suffered the brunt of the slave trade the most. From Africa, we lost the productive youth for over 3 centuries through the trade. But no sooner after the Declaration of Emancipation 200 years ago than the powers of the then Europe met at the Berlin Conference in 1844 to partition and subjugate into colonialism the entire homeland of Black Africa. This was yet another form of denial of citizenship and abuse of human rights, which lasted for more than another century. This domination continued until after the Second World War, when a certain strong moral force began to blow across the world, compelling nations, powerful power blocs, and even religions to begin to recognize the centrality of common humanity in all relationships. It was on the back of this force that the struggle for liberation and independence in the various parts of the world generally, and Africa in particular, was launched. In Africa, Ghana was the first country south of the Sahara to have gained her independence in 1957. The rest of the states followed, with South Africa, which had been clamped under the apartheid system, bringing up the rear by shattering the instituted discrimination of apartheid in 1991. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, the euphoria of independence led people to expect a quick eradication of enslavement and the denial of human rights. Alas, this euphoria was to be short-lived. The past 5 decades of independence have witnessed turbulence and disillusionment in many countries. Happily, within the past 10 years, there has been a refreshing advent of a new leadership on the continent of Africa, espousing good governance, which is founded on constitutional democracy with respect for human rights, the rule of law, transparency and accountability, religious tolerance, encouragement of private initiative, recognition of civil society organizations, respect for minority rights, and the abolition of gender discrimination. This new leadership has launched a process of rebirth of the continent under the name of the African Union. The new Partnership for Africa's Development, which is an agency of the African Union, is mandated to promote partnerships among the African countries and between them on one side and the rest of the world for mutual benefits. To establish the dedication and purposefulness of the member nations to the mission of uplifting Africa, they are encouraged to further submit themselves to the African peer review mechanism by which they each individually would submit voluntarily to be reviewed on the basis of the lofty principles of good governance by the rest of the members. Central to the principle is respect for human rights and the accountability of the leaders to the people. I'm glad to report that Ghana was the first country to be reviewed and is already implementing the recommendations from the review. With this trend, it is hoped that Africa is at long last making a serious dent against enslavement of its own citizens. Other encouraging developments to promote equality of humankind include the United Nations Declaration of the Millennium Development Goals, which are calculated to support self-reliance of nations in their struggles to eliminate illiteracy, hunger, poverty, disease, and sexism, which combine to enslave peoples and deny them their humanity. But the obstacles and pockets of resistance to this process of eradication of enslavement and the promotion of emancipation cannot and must not be underrated. Indeed, considering the unpredictability of the international markets of such a basic commodity as crude oil and its impact on the fragile economies of many of the nations of the so-called South, including Africa, and also the resistance of the rich nations of the world to make realistic adjustments to accommodate the poor nations within the World Trade Organization, it can be said that there is still a very long way to go to overcome the challenges. However, the moral force is still at work and is strongly influencing the United Nations and its agencies to keep redefining and refining themselves to sustain the drive of the evolution of one common humanity to bridge the ancient divide between the masters and the slaves. There is no stopping this positive force anyway. In many respects, the world has become a global village. Through science and technology, mankind is more exposed to each other than ever before. Increasingly, a common global culture is evolving in respect of ideas, language, music, and fashion, shaping our outlook and psychology as citizens of one world. It is not surprising that today many nations subscribe to international human rights instruments, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Convention Against All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Declaration on Rights of Disabled Persons, the establishment of the International Criminal Court, before which suspects, including even presidents, are held on charges of grievous violations of human rights, including genocide, is a landmark example of this development. These developments point to major inroads already made into the concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity, hitherto held sacrosanct, and behind which human rights abuses and atrocities have been perpetrated against innocent people. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, the criterion for global citizenship is simply fellow feeling, which should transcend ethnic, cultural, national, racial, religious, gender, territorial, and continental lines. Requiring neither passport nor visa, global citizenship is simply the commitment by all of us to be agents of change for a better global society in which we each shall serve as our brother's keeper and act as good Samaritans to one another. It is in this spirit, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, and with gratitude that I accept this honorary award of fellowship from the John Moores University of Liverpool. Thank you.
Mr. President, many distinguished guests, too long to enumerate, it will take all day. Thank you very much for coming today. And before I thank the President and give him two small personal gifts to remind him of today's proceedings, Lord Alton, at the beginning of his address, mentioned the fact that there are many important anniversaries being remembered in Liverpool this year. He neglected one, and so may I, on your behalf, wish Lord Alton many happy returns of the day. We've had another memorable Roscoe Lecture today. The university is very proud of the Roscoe Lecture series and the school's visits and awards that go behind that. We regard this as an important gift and contribution to the intellectual and cultural life of this great city. And today's lecture was no exception in that wonderful series. So I have, Mr. President, two small gifts. One is a book about the life of William Roscoe, but your lecture showed you've researched that pretty well already. But this may fill in a few extra gaps in that. The other one is a special gift, and for those who have not seen this before, this is a gift of a commemorative bowl, specially made by Wedgwood. Josiah Wedgwood was also a campaigner against slavery. And I'm delighted to say that ever since the Roscoe Lecture given by the Dalai Lama, they have produced a special bowl for each and every Roscoe lecturer with their name on the bowl under the glaze for you to keep as a personal gift and remember us forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand as the President and our distinguished platform party retire. May I ask all the guests, once they've retired, to please remain in their places, that you will then be ushered from the concert room. Ladies and gentlemen, your distinguished platform party.